for blessing us with the opportunity to be able to gather together. While we're small in number, Lord, we are so thankful for your family all throughout the world. We're so thankful for the word that you've blessed us with, Lord, and the teachings that you've blessed us with, and the forgiveness and the grace that you've blessed us with. Lord, be with us this evening as we go throughout this study. Help us to be able to learn from the example that was there before us. Help us to be able to grow, be able to see areas where we need to make changes, Lord, and make those changes so that we can be closer to you. Lord, so be with us this evening. Be with those on our sick list, especially Melanie and George after the passing of Heath. Lord, we just grieve with them, Lord. We pray that you can be with them, Lord, and comfort them. We know that this is just so difficult for them, Lord. So just be with them, Lord, and help us to just continue to keep our eyes focused on you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So 421 is the invitation song. 421. So this evening, we're going to continue our study over the minor prophets, which we've been going over here for just a couple weeks. And so the past, I'd say month, maybe month and a half, we've been going over this book, and we've made it through the first 3 chapters. Last week, we kind of got into chapter 4 just a little bit. We didn't get very far, though. And so today, our goal is going to be essentially to cover chapter 4 in its entirety. Hopefully, we can get there. We should be able to. But again, as always, even though we're a little bit lighter today than we typically are, raise your hand, ask a question, make a comment if you have anything or think of anything throughout class. And so, as a quick recap, the first couple of chapters, we learned that the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, has basically gone away from God. They've fallen into false idols. They've got Baal worship. They've got golden calves that they're worshiping. Jeroboam and Jeroboam II have kind of increased these different things, and so they've essentially turned away from God and they've fallen into idol worship. And as you can see there in the first chapter, depending on which translation you have, it could be harlotry. I think the ESV and New King James use whoredom. You could see adulteress, things of those natures. But basically, the what it's trying to get across is essentially they are in a cheating relationship. They're in an adulterous relationship. They are basically going around after different lovers instead of staying with the original lover, which would be God. And so as we go through the book of Hosea, you have the husband Hosea, and then you have the wife. And those two represent God, essentially, God and his relationship with Israel and the northern kingdom and how they have kind of forsaken that. So has Gomer forsaken Hosea. And so last week we went over chapter 3 and the several verses in it, just the 5 verses in it. And we see that in verse 1, the Lord tells Hosea to go and love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they have turned to other gods and love cakes of raisins. And so to go and love a woman who is loved by another man, the same thing that Israel, the nation, is doing, the northern kingdom is doing to God. And so essentially, if you go back up to chapter 1, God tells Hosea to go and marry a wife of harlotry, a wife of whoredom. So go and marry someone. And she essentially turns into an adulterous woman, as we can kind of pull from the context of the story. Has 2 different kids that are not credited to Hosea. The first one is credited, and we've talked about that. But here it says, go and love another one. So has she fallen into temple prostitution? It's possible. Has she essentially become enslaved to some of her lovers? It's very possible based off of some of the verses we're going to cover tonight. But essentially, she has become indebted to the things that are around her, to the other lovers that are around her. And so just as the nation of Israel has become essentially indebted because of their sin, because of their false worship, and they're going to come under need scrutiny, so is Gomer, the wife of Hosea. And if you look at the last part of verse 1, it says the cakes of raisins. That is something that was used in Baal worship. So when you start to think about that, that was one of their things in pagan worship rituals, which we'll talk about here in just a second when we get into verse 4 and 5 of chapter 3. But a lot of these things go back to false idol worship. And if you go and look at verse 2, he is told to go and buy her back. Right, and so she's essentially bought back for the price of a slave if you'd go to look at it. But there's 2 different payments that are used. There's some silver, or some shekels of silver, and then there's some barley and things of that nature. The same way that Christ is going to buy us back. And so again, you see this initial fulfillment, but then you also see this long-term fulfillment of Christ and the church, and then all the seed, the Gentiles being brought into the nation as a whole, and all becoming the seed of Abraham. And so they're bought back, or he is calling them to buy back, just as God would buy them back. And it goes on, it says in verse 3, it talks about how that they are essentially going to have to take this period, take this time, and they're going to have to be with one another, and they're going to have to kind of focus on the relationship, which is something that I think Christians need to take more time of. Jesus took time to stop and go pray, spent time to go spend with the Father. There was times where Jesus just kind of went off by himself, and I don't think we do that enough in our world today. I think we're just so consumed by media and this kind of all the flashing lights around us that we get so caught up in the things of the world, we don't stop to take time to spend time with God. So often we can kind of put God in the category on our calendar of when I have time, this is when I'll be with God, instead of this is my time with God, and when I've completed everything I need to be with, which we're going to be with him all day, right? That's what we should be. Then I can go and do other things, right? It's not filling up my calendar with worldly things and then figuring out what time I have left for God. It's God first, and then you can figure out the rest. And as you go on in verse 4 of chapter 3, he says that the children of Israel are going to dwell without a king or a prince. That's because they're going to be captured and led off into captivity. And so they're going to be underneath the rule of someone else. They're going to be without sacrifice or pillar. They're not going to be able to make the sacrifices because they're going to be led off into captivity. So things are going to change. But also the pillar is something that, once again, is pagan worship. And that's something that they're told back earlier on when they're given the commandments that they need to be leaving these things behind. They should be destroying these things. And then they're going to be without the ephod or household gods. So they're going to be without those things, especially the household gods. And you really think about that, it's going to come into play at the end of chapter 4. But these household gods that they're making are little temporary, smaller, miniature gods that you can carry around and worship wherever you're at, just for comfort of ease, essentially. How foolish are they going to feel with those little fake gods that they've made with hands when they're getting let off into captivity, and there's just nothing anybody can do about it? It's extremely foolish when you think about it. And so then in verse 5, it says, after this, the children shall return. So there is going to be something after the captivity that is done by the Assyrians. There is going to be a return, and they are going to do what? They're going to seek the Lord and David the king. So it's going to come back into the nation that God has called it to be, and they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. Fear, the lack of fear for God is essentially what's got them into this whole predicament to start off with. And if we're not careful, it can get us into the exact same predicament. Because if we lose the lack of fear that we should truly have for God, then we're going to fall into the exact same things that they've fallen in for, which is putting other things ahead of God. Maybe we're not making a golden calf in our spare time, and maybe we're not going out and doing all these different pagan worships and things of that nature. But if we're not careful and we lose that fear of God, we're going to fall exactly into their trap and putting other things ahead of God and putting God further down the totem pole. So we can't fall into that. And so as we go into chapter 4, this will be our main focus this evening. But at the beginning of verse 4, it says, hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or steadfast love and no knowledge of God in the land. Now, we covered a little bit of this last week. The word is coming from the Lord. Hosea is giving them the word. This is what a preacher should be doing. This is what a teacher should be doing. This is what a child of God should be doing. It's not, hear, O people, my opinion. It's, hear, O people, the word of God. Hear what God is saying. And that's something we need to remember. And so what are they falling into? Who has a controversy? The Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. And why is that? They don't have the faithfulness. They don't have the steadfast love. They don't have the knowledge. And when you think about all those things, without knowledge, it's going to be impossible to have the faithfulness. And it's going to be impossible to have love. And if you don't have love, you're not going to have those things either. And if you lack faithfulness, you're going to have those things. You got to have all these things put together, right? You can't just simply believe and then everything just falls into place. And so he has a controversy with them, and he's going to tackle 3 different sins as we go throughout chapter 4. The first one is the sins of the people. That's what he's going to take care of in verses 2 through 5. In verses 6 through 10, he's going to take care of the sins of the priest, which we're going to discuss a lot about that today. And then in verses 11 through 19, he talks about the sin of idolatry. So you have the sin of the people, sin of the priest, and then sins of idolatry. And so we're going to go through those different things. But they have no faithfulness, no steadfast love, and then no knowledge of God in this land. And I ask, we talked about this briefly last week, but I ask, are we losing the exact same things? Are we as congregations, are we as Christians losing our faithfulness? It's something we should be asking ourselves. Are we losing our steadfast love? I think this world's pretty angry today, and I think people are losing their love quicker than ever, or redefining love, I guess you could say, quicker than ever. It has to be steadfast. It has to be immovable because God's love for us is immovable. And the way that He has showed us love, we should be showing others love. It's not a false love. It's not a fluid love or a made-up love. It is a love that is truly never-ending. And that's something that we need to make sure is implanted in our life. And then most importantly, in my opinion, I guess you could say, is there is no knowledge of God in the land. I would argue that one of the biggest reasons that so many churches and so many people are falling away is because of the lack of knowledge in the land. There is so many false teachers that have gone out. We know this. The New Testament tells us about this. There's so many false teachers that have gone out. There's so many different things and opinions you can read online that the lack of true biblical knowledge is essentially leading people astray. And how does it lead us astray? Because we rely on what a preacher says instead of reading it for ourselves. And I'm not saying you can't trust a preacher. You better be able to trust your preacher. But also read it for yourself. Learn for yourself. Don't rely on another person to teach you everything you ought to know, because there's something on your end as well. We have to work out our own salvation. We have to make sure that we have knowledge, because a preacher can be wrong. As much as he always tries and wants to be right, he could be wrong, and he could make an earnest mistake. There's also a lot of teachers out there that are trying to deceive. And if you don't have knowledge, you'll never know that the deceit is right there in front of you. And so we have to have knowledge in the land. That's something that we need to increase. Verse 2, it goes on, it says, there is swearing, lying, murdering, stealing, and committing adultery. This goes through this goes through the ninth, sixth, eighth, and seventh commandments of the 10 commandments. So he goes straight at them for violating several of the 10 commandments that they're given. And the swearing that we read here in verse 2 is essentially making an oath. And what they are getting in trouble for, and we'll see this here in a couple of verses, is they are making oaths or swearing to God, making praise to God as they're doing idol worship at the same time. It doesn't take a lot of common sense to realize that that is extraordinarily foolish to do. That would be like going worshiping Satan today, and as you're worshiping Satan, you're praising God. It just does. The oil and water don't mix, and neither does worshiping Satan and praising God mix as well. And so they have this swearing, these false oaths. They have lying, they have murder and stealing and committing adultery. And if you notice here at the end of verse 2, it says, they break all bonds and bloodshed follows bloodshed. We talked about this last week, but circle, highlight, and underline that because we have to remember that in our world today. What follows bloodshed? More bloodshed. Who does vengeance belong to? The Lord. Right? If we go out and we cause bloodshed throughout the world, what is going to follow that? It's just more of the bloodshed. We have to be an example. We have to be a light to the people before us. And you can look out in the world today. What follows all the anger and violence that you can see in media and everywhere else today? More anger and violence is combated with it. So bloodshed is going to follow bloodshed, and what they are doing is just continuing to increase. And because of these things, therefore the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish. And all the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens and even the fish of the sea are taken away. The land, and we can see this back in the book of Joel, we talked about it earlier, but you can see that even the land is going to feel the impact of the captivity that is soon to come. Even the land is going to feel the repercussions of the sin that the people have done, because wrath is going to come upon them when the land is taken over and they're carried off into captivity. And all who dwell in it are going to languish. They are going to start to become feeble. They're going to start to become weak. And so everything is going to change. And even the beasts of the field are going to feel this, which this is what we talked about in Joel chapter 1, verse 18. Whenever the plague of the locusts come and they start to destroy all the land and all the crops, it doesn't just impact the people because of their sin, it impacts the land. And so the beasts of the field are going to feel it as well. The birds of the heaven are going to feel it. Even the fish of the sea are going to be taken away. Why? Well, the water is going to be changed as well. And so all these things are going to all these things are going to take place, and it's going to impact what? Everything. When Jesus decides to come back, does it just impact a couple people or everybody? Everybody. And so everyone is going to have to answer. All right, now this is where we were last week. This is where we kind of left off. Verse 4. Yet let no one contend, and let none accuse. For with you is my contention, O priest. When you think about the contending, this is something that in chapter 2 they are told to do. They're told to go and contend with their nation, go and contend with the mother, essentially, is what it's saying. Go and plead with the mother. We talked about how we don't do that in the world enough today, but here it says, yet let no one contend. Why should they not contend with the priest? Now you got to think about this in the pure sense for a second, which they're not living the way that this should be anyways. Why should you not contend in this time with a priest? What is the priest supposed to be doing? What should the priest be doing, I guess is a better question. Be preaching, he should be doing what? Following what God has commanded to do, right? He should be the spiritual example. He should be the one that is helping to guide the people, right? And so you should not contend against the priest, because the priest should be from the right lineage, right? He should be Levite. He should be from the right lineage. He should be all these things. He should be following after God, helping keep people on track. Now, is that what the priests here are doing? No. Right. And so we're going to see here in a couple verses, he's going to handle the priest. But it says, let no one contend and let no one accuse, for with you is my contention, O priest. And so he starts to go after the priest. But in Deuteronomy 17, verse 12, it says, the man who acts presumptuously, but not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God or the judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. You're supposed to listen to the priest, because the priest should be teaching truth. Now, we're going to deal with that in just a second, because they're not. But you can't have everyone just rebel against them, or you just have complete chaos. It's the way that God has set up the hierarchy, just as God today has set up who, essentially, to watch over the flock of a congregation? The elders, right? And so you're supposed to follow after the elders, because the elders are supposed to be overseers of the flock as God would want it. The elders have to be on their what? They better be living for God as well, right? And so if the elders are not careful, they can also just lead a whole congregation off a cliff. And so it says, you shall stumble by day. Now, I don't know about anybody here, but the example that I always use for stumbling is you get up at about 2 a.m. and you don't turn on the light switch, and then you kick something and you stub your toe real bad. It hurts extremely bad. I don't often do that. I have done it. I don't often do that in the middle of the day, right? So it says you are going to stumble by what? By day. You're going to stumble right there in the light. You're not going to stumble at night. It's going to be in broad daylight. You're going to stumble by the day. So not even the day would be able to avoid their escape. And so the night of darkness is not going to be able to hide them. It's not going to be able to protect them. They're going to stumble by day. The prophet also shall stumble with you by night. So who else is going to fall with the people? The priest as well, because they are living contrary to God. He says, and I will destroy your mother. The whole nation is going into captivity. It's not just going to be the people, and then the priests get to kind of leave scotch-free. It's going to be everybody. And here in verse 6, they go in to talk about kind of what we've already talked about numerous times before. And this is what can destroy a nation today. This is what can destroy a congregation today. Verse 6, my people are destroyed for what? Lack of knowledge. Can a congregation today be destroyed for a lack of knowledge? Yeah, sure can. Can your own spiritual life today be destroyed for a lack of knowledge? Yeah, absolutely. You know how easy, we're talking about this on Sunday, you know how easy it would be to compromise with the world if you have no knowledge of what God truly wants you to do and live? If you never read your Bible, if you never study your Bible, if you never take the time to gain knowledge of what God desires from you, how in the world are you going to do what He wants you to do? You don't know. So if you don't take time to learn His will and what is pleasing in His sight, you'll have no knowledge to accomplish that task. If I go and I love to watch YouTube videos on how to fix things, I've convinced myself that I can fix just about anything based off of a YouTube video. So if I ever build you something, watch out. But if I go and I learn how to, I don't know, put on a new door or something like that. If I go and learn to put on a new door, I've never done it before. I have no knowledge. And I decide I'm not even going to watch YouTube. How do you think that door is going to look if I have no knowledge? It ain't going to open and close. Same thing with our spiritual life today. If we have a lack of knowledge, it's going to be easy for destruction to take place. So His people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. But why do they have this lack of knowledge? It's not just because that they don't want to take the time to study per se, because you have what? Rejected knowledge. Oh, you have it. You know what you should be doing. You know who you should be worshiping, how and when and where, all these different things. But what are you doing? You rejected it. You can know every single verse in the Bible, and you could be able to read it from Genesis all the way to the very, very end, word for word. And that don't mean you get into heaven just because you know all the words. And you can have all the knowledge, but if you reject it, what does that knowledge do you? If I have all the knowledge that one could possibly have to put that door up, but I reject all the steps in it, is that door going to work even though I have the knowledge? It's not going to work. If I have the knowledge of how to get to heaven and how to worship God and how He wants it to be, but I reject those things, am I doing what He desires? No. Even though I have the knowledge, I'm still not doing it. So A, you have to have the knowledge. B, you can't reject it. So they've rejected it, and that's also why they're getting destroyed. He says, I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. Now, have they just simply forgotten it? It's there. The forgetting here is just kind of like I've just kind of put that thing to the side. I'm focused on something else. And if we're not careful, we do the exact same thing, and we can forget God. We talked about that at the end of chapter 2, I believe it was. It's the end of chapter 2, before I tell you wrong. Yes. At the end of chapter 2, we can start to forget God if we're not careful. And so here the priests have essentially they're essentially lacking knowledge because they're rejecting it. But also that they're forgetting the law and they're putting it aside. And in verse 7 we start to see, well, I'll finish up verse 6. But since they have forgotten these things, he says, I'm also going to forget your children. The whole lineage essentially is going to be messed up because of the way that all these things are happening and the fact that they're going to be led off into captivity and things are going to change. And so we've talked about this numerous times already. Kids can come out of a household that doesn't know God and they can learn to know God. Kids can also grow up in a household where the parents know God and they can decide to go a different way. The point of all this, though, is if we have broken households, essentially the environment that we were creating for our kids is a broken upbringing. We have to make sure that our houses are in order. We have to make sure that our congregations are in order because kids need to be brought up in these things. They need to be brought up in truth, and they don't need to be brought up in a lack of knowledge and rejecting knowledge and forgetting what God has commanded them to do. So in verse 7, it says, the more they increased, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. And this is where we start to go into really what the priests are kind of getting at what their sin is. But during the reign of King Jeroboam, the priesthood, they grew in prosperity, they grew in power. The nation is essentially doing good. They've got these ivory houses, as we talked about in previous studies, but they've increased in power. But what happens when they increase in power and they increase in wealth? The further they drift away from God. The further that we gain prosperity and the further that we gain power, what happens in our life? We can drift away from God too. We can start to depend on the power that we have here on earth. We can start to depend on the prosperity that we have. So the more that they increase, whether it be in number or whether it be in prosperity or wealth, whatever it may be, the more they have sinned against me. Because you have to remember, if you go back up in the earlier chapters, what have they done with the increase of grain and everything else that God has blessed them with? They've taken it and they've traded it for what? Gold and silver. And what do they do with that gold and silver? They make false idols. What God has blessed them with, they're now taking and making for Baal worship. So he says he's going to change their glory into shame. What is their glory? And this is the real issue. What's the glory that the people in the northern kingdom have? Prosperity, wealth, power, a whole bunch of things, right? They've drifted away from God. They've gone to this Baal worship and this golden calf. So what is their glory? It's in earthly things, the variety of earthly things. What should their glory be? Their glory should be in pleasing God. So he's going to change their glory, right? Their glory of earthly things into shame Because what's going to happen when they get led into captivity? Is Baal going to come and save them? Is the golden calf that they've made going to come and save them and rescue them? No, it's going to be sitting on a shelf looking real pretty and not doing anything because it can't do anything because it's a false god. And here in verse 8, this is where we really start to learn what they're getting into. But it says, they feed on the sin of my people. They are greedy for their iniquity. Some of the word sin right here could also mean sin offering, which is the version we're going to take this evening. Why would the priest feed on the sin or the sin offering of the people? What did the priest have to do with some of these sin offerings? Eat. So what it would seem to imply here is they are feeding on the sin of my people, right? So they have to eat these sin offerings, and they are greedy for their iniquity. So what are they wanting the people to do? The more sin, what does that mean they get to do? The more sin offerings. The more sin offerings, what does that mean they get to do? The more they get to eat. They're eating, I guess they're eating good, right? So they feed on the sin of my people, or the sin offerings of my people. They are greedy for their iniquity. They want more iniquity, more sin. And it shall be like people, like priests. So like the people are going to be punished, so are the priests. He says, I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. Who's going to be repaid for their deeds? Everybody. Not just the people, the priests as well. In the world today, who is going to be repaid for their deeds? Everybody. You, me, everyone else out there. We're going to be repaid for our deeds. So in verse 10 it goes on, it says, they shall eat but not be satisfied. They can eat all these different sin offerings, but they're not going to be satisfied. They are not going to be able to fill their stomach with all these sacrifices that are there before them. There we go. So they will play the whore but not multiply. This goes into, again, their adulterous relationship. And you have to think about all the things that is going on in pagan worship. They could have multiple wives. They could have all this harlotry. They could have temple prostitution. All kinds of idolatry is going around. All these different things are going into pagan worship. So they can play this. They can be in this adulterous relationship. They can be a harlot. They can have all these different things, but it's not going to increase. Now, when you do these things in pagan worship, the thought behind it is, and even Baal is a storm god, you could say, because he would help with the crops and things of that nature. But if you're doing all these things in pagan worship, the thought is that the more abundant the crop will be, the more lavish that you are in the pagan worship, the more your crop will be. Well, you're not going to multiply anymore. You're not going to have the abundant crop anymore, as this Baal worship is, supposedly promised. Because is Baal really the one prospering or increasing the crop in the land? It's God the whole time. And so the more that you play the whore, you're not going to multiply. And why? Because they have forsaken the Lord to do what? To cherish whoredom, wine, and new wine. So what are they cherishing? It's things of the world. What should they be cherishing? Things of God. So they've forsaken God to go after these worldly things. And then it goes on, it says to cherish whoredom, wine, and new wine, which take away what? The understanding. And we're going to see here more in just a couple verses just how bad their understanding and their thought is. But these things take away, right? The drunkenness and the debauchery of the pagan temple and all those different things that they go into take away the understanding from the heart, take away the knowledge from the heart. When you get so consumed with these things, you forsake all the knowledge, you forsake all the things that God has wanted you to do. And because you've done these things, this is where verse 13, I mean, you want to talk about complete foolishness. Those things essentially get you, in verse 12, those things get you into verse 12 where it says, my people inquire of a piece of wood. Now, I don't know who here likes to go hiking, but if you have a hiking stick, this is essentially what they would be doing in this time. You have a hiking stick and you set it down and you just let go of it and you see which way it falls. That's how they're trying to determine what they should be doing in life. That's their oracles of God. So it says, my people inquire of a piece of wood, and their walking staff gives them oracles. How could you deem yourself as a knowledgeable and intelligent person if you seek guidance from a walking stick? Would be my first question. It seems really foolish, doesn't it? Yet who fell for it?
Must be something in the wine.
Yeah, something in the wine, right? That's good. Um, so they've fallen into this. I mean, you really have to stop and think about this for a second. All the things that they've been through, all the things that God has done for them, and here they are essentially asking a piece of wood that is used for a walking stick for guidance in life, in oracles. Is that a piece of wood giving you anything? Ain't giving you anything. Nothing. Not, lick, zero. None of these things. So they've lost their understanding, they've lost their knowledge, they've fallen into all these worldly things. They've fallen so far, right? And the priests essentially are not doing as they should. And so it says the people inquire of a piece of wood and their walking staff to give them oracles. For a spirit of whoredom has led them astray, and they have left their God to play the whore. What have they done? They've left God to go and chase after all these different idols and all these different worldly things. Could you imagine leaving God for a piece of wood? Could you imagine leaving God for a golden calf or whatever else they've dreamed up in this scenario? Because that's what's happening. Now, I'll ask this: could you imagine leaving God for work? Could you imagine leaving God for a sporting event? Could you imagine leaving God for family that's come into town? Could you imagine leaving God for, I don't know, draw up what causes people to leave God or not give God their whole heart? It is just as foolish because why? Because you're still leaving God. And anytime you leave God, it's foolish. And we can't be doing these things. And so this spirit of whoredom, this spirit of idolatry, of harlotry has led them astray. These false idols have led them astray. And it goes on in verse 13. And it says, they sacrifice on the top of the mountains and burn offerings on the hills under oak, popular terebinth, because the shade is good. So the thought behind this is if you go on a mountaintop, so if I was going to Mount Lacotte, I'd be closer to heaven to go do these sacrifices. And so you also have to think, too, the Northern Kingdom has set up different places for them to essentially make offerings, which also goes against what God has commanded. But they sacrifice on the top of the mountains. This is mentioned in uh, Kings as well, in the book of Kings, some of these different high places, which it could be a reference to. But they've made these sacrifices on the top of the mountains, and then it goes on and it says, "Therefore your daughters play the whore, and your brides commit adultery." What's going on in these pagan temples and these pagan worships? You have temple prostitutes and all kinds of different things. So because the people are corrupt, because the priests are corrupt, now you've got the daughters and the brides doing what? Living the exact same lavish lifestyle, chasing after different lovers. You say, oh, that's horrible. That's terrible. Boy, their punishment's going to be extreme, right? He says, I'm not going to punish your daughters here in verse 14 when they play the whore, nor your brides when they commit adultery. Why? For the men themselves go aside with prostitutes and sacrifice with cult prostitutes. So why am I not going to punish the wife and the daughter? What are the men doing? The same thing. And is God expecting who's God expecting more from? I would say he expects a lot from everybody, right? But who's he really expecting to be the example here? To start as the example. Should be starting from the priest, right? The priest should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. Just as today, the elders, deacons should be doing what they should be doing. And it should trickle down, essentially. We'll talk about it Sunday. But when Adam and Eve sinned, who should have spoke up? Who was there and just was complicit and didn't say anything? Adam. Should have said something. Should have said something. Here, the men should have said something. And the men need to say something today. The men are supposed to be what of the household? Head of the household. The men are supposed to be doing what roles in congregations? Leading. But why do we see men not doing that as much? Why do we see men taking a back seat to everything? The men have to be more involved. God expects us to be more involved. And so he says he's not going to punish the daughters. He's not going to punish the brides. For the men themselves, go aside with prostitutes. They're doing the same thing. And when you really start to think about this, if if their daughters and their daughters and their brides are doing these things, and the men are doing these things, what essentially is happening? Who are the men committing these awful acts with? Essentially, your neighbors, right? Daughter or bride. Because all of them are now involved in this thing. So you just have this huge, essentially, pool of people all caught up in this sin, all essentially just sinning their own souls, right? Making their own souls worse because no one is standing up and saying anything. And so the men are doing the same thing. And then at the end of verse 14, it says, and a people without understanding shall come to ruin. What do you notice in chapter 4? Knowledge and what? Understanding. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't understand it, it doesn't do you any good. You have to do what? Understand it. And if you have the knowledge of God and you understand it, you've got a good foundation. If you lack understanding, what's going to come? Ruin. What will come to ruin in our congregation if we don't have understanding? Or what will happen in our congregation if we don't have understanding? Ruin, right? And so if you don't have knowledge, destruction. And people without understanding shall come to ruin. We have to have understanding of what God desires from us. Here in verse 15 and following, this is where we'll kind of wrap up this evening. But it says, though you play the whore, O Israel, let not Judah become guilty. This is where it really starts to play in here this time to Judah, but you can even look at in our life today. Though the world goes after corruption, and though the world goes after these evil things, don't you what? Don't you do it. Don't you follow the example of the world. Don't you go and chase after these false idols. You stay strong. Just because they're doing it, don't mean you have to do it. You can look at this with different congregations, different denominations, whatever you want to say. Just because that congregation over there is being led astray and going after false things, don't you do it. Why? Because you have the knowledge and what? The understanding to know better. If you have those two things, you're set up for success. But when you forsake those two things, guess what? Ruin, destruction follow. Don't you follow after those things. So he says, let not Judah become guilty. Judah, don't you follow after these things. Says, enter into Gilgal, nor go up to Beth-aven, and swear not as the Lord lives. So Hosea is warning Judah not to follow in the footsteps of Israel. They should not become guilty of committing this harlotry or getting involved in idols. The second thing, when he says they should not go to Gilgal, this is where one of the adulterous shrines of the northern kingdom is located. So it's about a mile from Jericho. So this is where one of the shrines are. Don't you go there. Don't start in this idol worship. And then it goes on, nor go up to Beth-aven, which essentially is another name for Bethel. And so you can see that the name is changed, whether because of what it's come or potentially because there is idol worship and a golden calf there or something of that nature. But don't go there. Heed the warning. Don't fall into the temptation. And this is something else. We talked about it briefly a second ago. And swear not as the Lord lives. So as Yahweh lives, or as the Lord lives, was a standard oath, you could say, of in ancient Israel during this time. And so when you think about this, if they're doing pagan worship and worshiping a golden calf or whatever it may be at the time, if they're worshiping these things, what is the literal last thing you should say? As the Lord lives. That's what we talked about earlier. Oil and water don't mix, and neither should you try to give an oath or swear to the Lord as you're doing a false worship. And so then he goes on, and I love this example here in verse 16. But he says, like a stubborn heifer, Israel is stubborn. So like a stubborn heifer, Israel is stubborn. Can the Lord now feed them like a lamb in broad pasture? So the people are stubborn because they should have the knowledge and they should have the understanding, but they've forsaken it. Would it be smart to feed a lamb in this broad pasture with no protection? What's going to happen? The wolves are going to eat it up, right? The beasts around it are going to eat it up. It's an easy target with just no protection. And so, no, he could not do that. And he goes on in verse 17, and this is where we can start to apply it to our life today as well. But it says, Ephraim is joined to idols, leave him alone. So Ephraim is caught up in this. And Ephraim was one of the most prominent tribes there in the northern kingdom. So this part, Ephraim, the northern kingdom, they're all joined up in idols. He says, leave them alone. When you're joined with idols, you are essentially married, committed, whatever word you want to use. You are bought into these idols. And apparently it is so bad that what does God say? You leave them what? You leave them alone. When we get so wrapped up in sin and we continue to press against God, will he eventually just leave us to go our own way? He ain't going to force you to love him. Just like he ain't going to force you to enjoy heaven one day. And I've used this example 1,000 times, but if you don't enjoy worship today, and if you don't enjoy singing praises to God, and you don't enjoy coming and being with other believers, why in the world would God reward you with heaven? Where that's all you're going to be doing. If you don't like it here, why would he reward you with it for eternity? And so we ought to be enjoying these things, and we should be enjoying these things because it's what God desires from us. So he says, leave them alone. And in verse 18, it says, when their drink is gone, they give themselves to whoring. Their rulers dearly love shame. So when the drink is gone, what do they turn into? Whoredom and going after one another. You see the sin that they're wrapped up in? You see the things that they're caught up in? Because they've gotten this pagan worship, right? And they say all these things are going to help with prosperity and the crops in the field and all these different things. Now you're caught up in all these different shameful acts, and you go from one thing, you go from one sin to another sin. You get caught up in one thing, and it leads you to another thing. And it says, their rulers deeply love shame. Verse 19, this is where we'll end tonight. But it says, a wind has wrapped them in its wings, and they shall be ashamed because of their sacrifices. When you think about their captivity and when they're going to get let out, you can't see the wind, but it wraps you up in its wings, as it gives us the analogy. You're carried off into captivity. The little mobile idol that you made, the little household god that you made, it's not doing anything. The golden calf you made, it's not doing anything. All the lovers that you had back there when you're out doing this, all kinds of these temple prostitution, other things, it's not going to do you a lick of good. Why are all those things not going to do you a lick of good? Because they're all worldly. You think they felt foolish if they saw a walking stick when they were getting let out into captivity? They got so far away from God that they would turn to a walking stick, golden calf, Baal worship, temple prostitution. That's how far away they got from God. And when they're let out into captivity, they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. The sacrifices they made that they thought was going to help them, so far from it. All those sacrifices they made are not going to save them from them being carried off into captivity because they've forsaken, they've forgotten, they've lost the knowledge, the understanding of what God desires from them. Oh, how foolish are they going to feel? Can you imagine the reflection that they have as they're walking off into captivity? And they think about all the things that led them up into that point. All the things that they could have at one point or another stopped and changed in order to not have that captivity happen. Maybe when we decided to turn to a walking stick, maybe we should have turned back to God. Maybe when we saw that the things of the land were not going well, we were worshiping a golden calf, and we remembered what God had told us. Maybe we should have dropped those things and turned back. Was it too late once they started heading off into captivity? He tells us earlier, if you remember, that nothing was going to stop them being led off into captivity. Everyone was going to watch it happen. As I said earlier, we might not be asking a walking stick for help or worshiping a golden calf or this, that, and the other. But one day, I guess you could say our leading off is going to take place. As they are led off into captivity, right? One day, our final day is going to come, and we do not need to have the same regret that I guarantee they had as they were being led off into captivity of, I wish I would have changed this. I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I wouldn't have worshiped these things. I wish I would have put God in the rightful place. I wish I wouldn't have forsaken knowledge. I wish I would have focused on understanding. I wish I would have applied these things. And now it's what? Too late. Say, man, I had all those years, however many years it is. I had all those years to fix these things. And now I have to deal with an eternity of an outcome. Sounds harsh. But on the contrary, I lived for so many years, this, that, and the other. I kept the knowledge. I focused on the understanding. I lived for God. I put him in his rightful place. And because of that, what? I'm led to a better place. If you go back up earlier, it says the valley of Achor, right? Which is what? Trial, tribulation, sorrow. The valley of trouble will turn to what? A door of hope. That's the promise that a Christian has. Because I haven't forsaken the knowledge, because I've focused on the understanding, during this life, I've done what God has wanted, and now I'm rewarded with what? An eternal outcome that will surely be lovely, will surely be a reward, will be something that will be far greater than any word old Merriam-Webster has ever made. And so that's our charge for the evening, charge for the rest of the week. Are we forsaking knowledge? Are we losing our understanding? Are we chasing after things of the world instead of chasing after what God desires? Because if we're chasing after things of the world, we're going to feel extremely ashamed of the sacrifices, extremely ashamed of the things we've done when that final day comes and it's too late to change the outcome. When the shot clock hits zero, that's the end of it. And so I don't know what is on your heart this evening. I don't know if you have made sacrifices or gone away forsaking the knowledge of God. But if you have, now is the best time to change. Because we're not promised later on tonight. We're not promised tomorrow. We're not promised Sunday. We're not promised 10 years from now. And so, quote that I don't know who said it, but we should prepare as today as our last, but at the same time prepare if we're still planning to live for 10 or 50 or 100 more years. Always prepare for the day of the Lord because it's coming. And so we need to be ready for that, and we need to make sure that he's in his rightful place. So if you have a need this evening, if you have anything that you want prayers for or need any assistance, please just come forward as we stand and as we sing with Brian. Thank y'all.